What's up, guys, and welcome back to I Will Friends English. Today we have a returning guest for the first time on this channel. Jesus, you were with us before, and you were talking about how difficult it is to translate. Well, today we're going to chase this a little bit longer to a guy who has been doing accent coaching for several years now. What do you find could be some of the most challenging things that you have experienced when you're dealing with this onslaught of difference in language and in culture while you're trying to go back and forth of accents and all the things? How do you handle that?
This is a great question. I don't really spend a whole lot of time translating in between the languages, to be perfectly honest. The majority of my life now basically unfolds in English. However, at least once a week, I am in a position where I don't really have to translate, but actually use my other language way more often. And that's because I've been trying to stay in touch with my parents for these last 10 years now. And so we video call once a week now on Saturdays. And so I kind of have to put the English on hold and then get into the Spanish language mindset. And one thing that I can say is that when you don't really use your two languages kind of equally, when you step into the other one, your brain kind of like sputters, like the engine of a vehicle. You start sputtering and spluttering. And so it's kind of hard to keep up and not get your wires crossed. It happens to me a lot, actually, that I try to say something to them. And I know that what I'm saying in Spanish makes sense, but it is, let's say, less sophisticated than what I can do in English because I'm basically spending 90+% of my life now speaking this language instead of the other one. And so definitely there is a bit of a gap, between the two. I think that some of that can perhaps bear some analogy to interpretation for people that are doing it either professionally or informally occasionally. I think that there is a very close analogy that you can draw between the two. Maybe something else that I can say there is that I feel that if you want to do something like this proficiently, or let's say with some, let's say, degree of success, I think it makes sense or it would be good for you to realize, or I guess be honest with yourself as far as are the two languages kind of on an equal level? Because that's certainly not the case for me. And so I would definitely look into that a little bit because my guess is, as it is the case for most of us that speak more than one language, one is dominant over the other.
Oh,
To
yeah.
what extent, obviously, that'll change, depending on the individual. But if there is a significant discrepancy between how easy it is for you to express yourself, I would certainly try to address that first and foremost, because I think that for people that are doing this professionally, I'm sure that time is a crucial factor. There's no time to waste when it
Mhm.
comes to that. I think definitely there's an element of efficiency, but basically, it is very challenging to be in those situations. My number of experiences doing something like this has been very limited. There are only two major instances in my life where this has happened.
Would you say that you have to make the learned language predominant for a while, for a time before you get to where you can go back and forth? Because I totally understand the sputtering. You're right. It's like you shift and it's like turning on a car after it hasn't been on for a while, right? It's easy to get into that. And it could be your native language, it could be the target language. I think it's easier to happen for the target language. But in your case, you moved here and you live this language, right? Would you
Yes.
say that you have to take that target language and live it for a time to be able to get it to where it can be predominant when it needs to be? Or do you think you can just kind of facilitate that in your home culture where you still speak 90% of the time in your own language and you can maintain this fluent like ability and yeah, sputter a little bit when you shift back into, your target language, in this case English. Do you think it's valuable for a time to have it take a predominant part of your life, if that makes sense?
I believe it makes sense. I would say kind of like a boring answer here, but I think it really, this will vary, from one person to the other. Because, for
Sure.
instance, in my case, I live in America and the vast majority of my life, takes place in one language. Other than this weekly communication with my parents, I'm not
Mhm.
speaking Spanish here with anybody else. My wife and I kind of, use Spanish as well, between the two of us. It's a little bit of a different interaction, but it is not something that is sustained or part of our routine. I would say that if you are living in a foreign country where you are interpreting, in one way or another, I think it does make sense to spend some time exclusively in that target language so that you develop that ease, that comes with using it, living it, experiencing it, and I guess just going about your daily life, in a language. Because let's say that some of our audience or your audience is based here in America. It is very likely that when they do their interpretation job, they
Mhm.
are going to be using, let's say, the other language
Mhm.
less than English. I think that's a pretty safe assumption to make. And so I think that that would be advised that they spend some time exclusively in the language to be fully acclimated, let's say, to
Mhm.
it, and then maybe have some kind of a practice, round or a test run, of what the interpretation can look like. Obviously, I think that there's different degrees of, let's say, how serious the interpretation is or has to be. Obviously,
Mhm.
there are high stakes situations. But yes, I think the target language, the one that you're using the most, it just simply makes sense, that you would be better at it, devote yourself exclusively to it, and then kind of go back and forth, between the two in one way or another.
Go ahead and tell us this story because you have a really good example of, in this case, you're put into this position where you do have to do this translation, but you're having to wrestle with this interpretation with a target language that you've spent so much time with versus going back to your original language and having to, adjust in that sense. So go ahead and share that. That would be, I think, super valuable.
So let me give you the one that I think is definitely much more casual. Then I'll get
Mhm.
into the more serious one. So I was 17 years old when I had the chance to volunteer as an interpreter for a group of, I'm not exactly sure, what they were, but they went there to Colombia. It was a group of American volunteers. I don't know really what the connection is, but there are plenty of organizations, that do volunteer work overseas. A lot of them are faith based, like Christian organizations, that go to countries in Latin America to do all kinds of, let's say, free healthcare, for lack of a better term. And so a group of these people were there providing free eye care services, or at least let's say checks. And
Mm.
so I was there. I don't know how exactly I got wind of what was happening, that was going to happen, but I go to one of their locations where they were doing this. And it was very kind of basic things, translating basic commands, asking, kind of like a vision check. And so that was the first time in my life that I was in a situation where I had to do some interpretation. It didn't have to be particularly quick because they picked up on some of the basic language extremely quickly because these are very transactional kind of things. You can just basically knock it out very quickly. So there really wasn't much to it. And it was definitely, very low stress environment. There was really nothing that could have made it, let's say, well, stressful. That was a long time ago. I'm 35 years old now. Some of the details, I just don't remember them anymore. But I do remember that that was the very first time that I was in a situation like that. Now, this more recent one, this one happened in November of last year. So I need to give a little bit of context. So I work in the local courthouse. I've been there for 5 years. I'm a county employee. And for the last almost 3 years now, I've been working directly under one of the judges in the family division of the
Mm.
circuit court. Every judge has two staff members, a secretary, and a court services officer. I'm the
Mm.
court services officer for one of these judges. Several months ago now, one of the other judge in the family division had one of her staff members move on to another position. And so she had a vacancy for a while. And it just so happened that one day her other staff member was out on a planned vacation. And so they needed someone to go into the courtroom there and just simply help out, cover, fill in for this other person. And I've already been there before. I had actually helped out, before doing the same thing. But what was different here this time is that there was this couple that was going through their final divorce proceeding. My guess is that there are a lot of similarities across the states, but basically the plaintiff and defendant have to answer a number of questions under oath from the judge just to verify that the statute, is being satisfied or that the demands of the law are being met. And what happens was that it never occurred to anyone at any point that the defendant did not speak English. The plaintiff was the one that is obviously addressed first. She renders her testimony. And then when it's time for the defendant to basically corroborate, the proofs, as we call them, that's when the plaintiff says to us, oh, he doesn't really speak English. So that's the context. Now, check this out. This gets really interesting. This happens. The judge realizes, oh, well, we're going to have to get an interpretation service on the phone to, carry out this in a way that's meets due process. So I start to get that set up, and I hesitate for a while to mention that I speak Spanish and that I would be able to interpret in this situation because I know the script. There's really nothing to it. It is always the same set of questions. And so I say that to the judge, and then she asks, oh, do you want to do this? Do you think you could do it? I said, yes, I can do this. And so we basically start over with the process, and we do it in the style or let's say the mode of sequential interpretation. I don't think I could do simultaneous interpretation. That one seems incredibly daunting to me. And I think that takes a different kind of skill set. I can do sequential. She speaks one line in English, and then I give the corresponding translation, in Spanish. It does take a little bit longer, to go through the script. But there were some things that really make me kind of, stumble over my own words because I had never really, done this in any way. I know the words, I know what the meaning is behind them, but finding the right word at that time, especially when I have to consider that there are other people waiting in line to get their hearing, there's an element of pressure there. Certainly, what I can say is that I believe that if I were to do this more often, it would be much more, efficient. I'd be able to knock it out in 5 minutes instead of 10, which is what it took us last time or when this happened. So we just simply go through that. There were just some things, that are very kind of technical terms that I knew, but, when you're in the moment, it doesn't really come out as readily if you have not been doing this, with any, consistency. But here's the kicker, because you see, after we're done and everybody goes, home, the judge tells me that I had no idea that she spoke Spanish. Now, you see, she knows me, as in she's seen me in the building. I know her name. She knows my name. She knows that I work with the other judge. And you would think that based on the name, at the very least, I don't think it is an unreasonable presumption that I would speak Spanish. But she did not think that at all. It didn't cross her mind one bit, that I would be able to speak this language. And you see, that unspoken assumption was incredible because actually that's one of the most recent compliments, let's say, that I've had on my English. A little bit, veiled, but I still believe it's a compliment, that I speak in such a way that it doesn't cross her mind at all that I can speak another language, not just English.
Right.
And so for the value, for what it's worth, I think it was a great compliment.
I think that is an amazing story. For me, I wish I could just be in your shoes. I wish I could be in that moment because I've seen it before with some other people, the same thing. My mentor, who lived in China for 13 years and he speaks very good Chinese, he actually came back and he went into the court system as well with one of his friends who's a lawyer. And now he's doing it stateside here in America, where he's doing this translation and taking notes. And mainly it's about like the cases before they get to court, right? Getting their statements down and getting it all sorted and stuff like that. So in the moment, there's a lot less pressure of like, there's a person staring at me.
Yes.
But generally speaking, he said the same thing too, right? Where somebody's like, oh, I didn't even know that was a thing. For me, I'm going to be honest, it's so embarrassing for me because when we were in Asia, it was very obvious we were not from around there. Everybody assumed that. And so also everybody assumed the opposite assumption that they just did for you. They assumed you're white, so there's no way that you can speak Chinese. So for us, we had I don't know how to say it, the unfortunate circumstance where we would break people's reality that we could speak Chinese. And every time it would be something so simple that they were like, whoa, you can speak Chinese. And every time we would just kind of like I don't know, almost face palm. Like, yes, we can speak Chinese, but we flipped the equation and now we're back in the States. And now I can go up to a person with 100% full confidence and know that they are from Chinese heritage. They don't look Korean to me. They don't look Japanese to me. They look Chinese. Yet I still have this nagging underlying fear that if I go up to that person and speak Chinese, they're going to be like, "What? I was born in Texas." And I'm like, "Oh
Yeah.
man, to embrace that awkwardness is just on another level." And I've done it before where I'm just like, this person is Chinese. So I go up to them and they're like, "I don't speak Chinese." I'm like, "Oh man, a little part of my soul dies inside when I try to do that." But there are other times where I go up to a person. I remember this was from a local restaurant owner. I come up to him and it was completely outside the context. I was playing a game with his son at the time and I didn't know he was there. He was just kind of watching over it and we were playing. And he comes up to me because I'm talking to the boy in English and in Chinese. The boy's English was great. He was raised here in America. His English was really good. His Chinese was actually not very good. And so the father comes in, he's the exact opposite. Where if you looked at him, you would think that guy looks like he's from China, but he couldn't speak English at all. And so he had a hard time. And so I was actually in the middle of this translation triangle, the same kind of situation that you were in, but it was to father to son. And like the father and son could communicate fairly well, but it was, you could tell this guy had been kind of lost a little bit. Like you could tell he hadn't had a whole lot of interaction with other people just because of that language
Very.
barrier.
Yes. No, and you see, what really struck me in this experience was the fact that at least here where I live, we have a pretty diverse workforce. I mean, it's not like I'm the only Hispanic in this department or in this for the county. There are plenty of others, that let's just simply say look like me. But it was just, again, the assumption, that was underlying, the situation. It just didn't occur to her, that I could speak Spanish. It is interesting. It is so fascinating, to me. And, I'm kind of hoping for the day that this happens again, have a second, crack at the interpretation. I mean, it was interesting. And it is, I believe, a different kind of a skill set. It's not the same as, let's say, general language fluency. There is something else here at play. And you have to be juggling the two languages in your head more often than you normally do. That would be, again, kind of like to, circle back to what I said earlier. That would be the hardest thing for me. The thing that I would definitely have to work on first if I ever wanted to do something like this, more frequently. I mean, this is not my regular line of work. I don't do this at all, in any capacity. But, it was a unique opportunity. And you see, I was this close back then to just go along and get somebody on the phone to interpret. But I just thought, I can do this. It's going to be clunky, a little awkward, but I can save ourselves time. And that's a big consideration when you are in a courtroom. They call it judicial economy, to use a very fancy term, that they like to throw out sometimes. And I think it is, because, it is the time of the court and we are trying to serve as many people as we can. And if we can avoid unnecessary delays, you better believe, that we're going to be on it.
In this case, something that I found is interesting working with people who are already fluent. They've been here for 20 plus years, but they grew into specialties in English. Okay. And they have some difficulties in their native language with jargon that they know in English, but they have no idea what the word is in their native language, right? Did that happen to you in this case at all? Like, were there some of the legal terms that you didn't know what they were in Spanish?
I don't believe so. The actual terminology, the terms themselves, I have memorized them, so nothing was new to me. It was just stringing together, specifically, I want to say questions. Well, maybe statements. I think those are a little bit harder to interpret on the spot. And I have to sometimes leave some things out or basically paraphrase, you know, a longer sentence in English, compress it into something, distill it down to something different in Spanish, but obviously preserving the sense or the meaning, not the actual words. It's interesting. Before this happened, maybe going back, a few more years, I had considered the possibility of one day having this happen to me. Because you see, before I got into this position of being a judicial staff member, I had been in the clerk's office, kind of like customer service position. And I had my fair share, granted small, encounters with population that didn't speak English. The interaction was different and I was not interpreting. It was more of simply serving in that specific language. I
Mm.
might have had at some point or another to interpret or translate some things for my coworkers who didn't speak Spanish, but that was really very limited because in the end, I was, able to take care of what they needed only in Spanish and not have to worry about translating really much of anything.
Right.
But it does mean that I took the time, all those years ago to memorize some of those very common terms like plaintiff, defendant, case number, testimony, verdict, things like that. And so it's relatively easy to memorize. But
Yeah.
when you have to actually put it into like complete sentences or questions, that's different.
It's completely different.
The thing that I find most fascinating about your example is that there is idea in linguistics that when you learn a new language, you start a new life. There's a new you, there's a new human being, basically. You're birthed into a new English version of yourself or a Chinese version of yourself or whatever. And that's very, mystical or, existential or whatever. But in reality, in this case, what's cool is that you're kind of a testimony on that, where somebody was looking at you and they're like, oh, Jesus, that guy that works down the hall from me. And they're like, oh, there's another Jesus. Like there's a Spanish speaking Jesus that I'd never even realized was there. Obviously, we shouldn't judge books by their covers, but whatever, that happens. So the thing I find most fascinating is that you did this. You did actually create a whole new you in this new language. And I'm sure everybody is asking the question that I have on my mind, which is, how did you do that? How did you get to that point where, you're not deceiving anyone, but how did you get to that point where you were basically a new person?
There's a lot of, to your point, that we actually touched on or actually did kind of a deep dive, I believe, last year. So I would recommend that people go back and listen to that episode. But this has been a very long story in the making for me, this language. Kind of like, let's say, finding my new persona in the language. And there's a lot of history, there. But I believe that I just simply had great opportunities that I took advantage, of. And I put myself in situations where there's a bit of an expectation to perform, but some pressure at the same time.
Mhm.
It's kind of like this boilerplate advice that we give people now, that you take risks, which I get it. Saying it, we're jaded, from that. I get it. I understand. But there is truth to it. There really is. And it really comes down, in my mind, to application in real life. How likely are you to be in a situation where you apply this in real life, in situations that matter to you? Let me say something real quickly here that I did not have a chance to mention, I guess, last year when we first talked. I had the chance when I was still living in Colombia to go to some international education fairs. I'm sure you know what that, would be. You have institutions here in America that go to other countries, recruiting, kind of like scouting for talent. And there were actually a few of those happening. Back then, I was 19, 20 years old. I went to a lot of these, events. And for me, that was like exhibit A of applying language in real life. I used to daydream about coming here to America, doing an intensive ESL course, or perhaps even going into an undergraduate degree. That never happened. As you can imagine, the one thing that really prevented all of that from happening was the financial aspect of
Yeah.
things, unfortunately. But I used to think about that a lot. And so these experiences kind of coincide or overlap very closely with my own personal accent training, as in myself acquiring an American accent. And so for me, it was kind of like two things. I wanted to apply what I was learning in real life, but also in a way, kind of like test my English
Mm.
indirectly in being in that situation. Because obviously, none of these people spoke Spanish at all. And so I think I'm just very fortunate to have access to those experiences, go for it, put myself in the situation. I mean, it is nerve wracking, to be in those situations, but you take the first step and everything basically falls into place afterwards. I
Mm.
think it really does. Kind of like the Nike slogan, just do it.
Just do it.
I mean, it sounds deceptively simple. But I mean, it really is.
It is funny when you take all of language learning. It is such a difficult thing to do in so many ways, but the real basis of it is just do it. Just go out there, show up consistently, practice, and pay attention while you're practicing, right? It's not go out and memorize 10,000 words. It's not go out and do all these things. And there's so many ways that you could say it, but really it's just show up and do the thing, which learning any skill is the same way. Dieting, exercise, all of those are the same thing. Just go do it. That's the simple thing. It's a hard thing to do. It's easier said than done for sure. But if you show up consistently and you take advantage of those opportunities as they come, if you get yourself comfortable with being uncomfortable, you can accomplish a lot. You can accomplish so much in life with any skill doing that very thing. But I think we've complicated it in a lot of ways. We want to break it down to all these steps and things like that. Of course, we can do that. But I think a lot of times we sit here and we plan and plan and plan and create these steps and these master plans and stuff when really the first step is just go do it. Just go do something.
I was just thinking about it in terms of like traveling. Like a person can be like, oh man, I want to travel the world. And they have their bags packed. They have their itineraries. Like they have the things they want to do when they get to that country. They have all of the activities, the people that they want to travel with. They even have some of the financials down. I'm going to spend this much on that and this much. They get everything ready and they're still not actually traveling.
They're not
Like
Kevin
they're not
Pickens.
actually taking the step and doing it and making the decision and going to the airport, getting on the plane and actually going. And obviously we need to be prepared. We need to prepare. We need to memorize vocabulary words.
You
Obviously
could just get on a plane.
you could. I mean, we did. We actually did that. We only knew 2 words in Chinese when we showed up,
It was
but
incredibly frustrating and a slower route. I do not suggest anybody do that. But
having some
yeah,
preparation is a good idea. But ultimately, like you said, Liz, it's looking out for those opportunities, right? Looking out for ways that you can participate or engage and
Mhm.
actually start that process rolling. A lot of people, I think, compare it to overnight successes. And when you look into a lot of overnight successes, they've been working for a long time at their craft. And so it's really just that we noticed them overnight, but they've been working at it for years and years and years. So if somebody is wanting to kind of work with you or to find you to learn more about your accent reduction or accent coaching, where could they find you as they try to basically follow in your footsteps of being a new them? Where could they find you?
So right now, my social media accounts have been kind of dead lately, to be perfectly honest. But you can find me on YouTube and Instagram. And I believe that you guys shared my personal email address, which is, what I use for my YouTube channel and my Instagram for that matter. So all of that information is there. I'm always, open to messages, questions. I don't have a program, really worked out completely in my mind, but I have a sense of where someone can start. And actually, if I may say this, in this vast field of ESL teaching, my niche is pronunciation training, accent training, but I still consider myself a traditional ESL teacher. Ideally, for me, I feel much more comfortable and skilled at working with upper, intermediate to advanced students. I believe that I have some good things, to offer there. Let me just give you one example. There are a lot of persistent mistakes that are made by highly proficient speakers of the language that are distracting and,
Oh yeah.
in my opinion, just egregious that we can address directly, you know, put that to rest. I shoot people straight. Let's put it that way. And I'm more than happy to do that, with more advanced learners of English.
You've taken the time to weed those things out in your own language learning, and you can help somebody else walk through the same.
And
Absolutely.
it's that
Yes.
personal feedback.
It's key.
There's plenty of content out there, right? There's plenty of content. There's plenty of courses. It's getting another person and looking them in the face and saying, what am I doing wrong? How can I do it better? And that's the thing that I think is so cool is that your story is literally a testimony of that process, the years in the making, like you've described, of how can that happen?
Mhm.
How do I get to that point of saying, I want to sound normal. I want to sound impactful. I want to sound fluent. And that is so cool that we've had you on the channel twice now. And both times you've added a lot of value, I know, into my life, but also into a lot of people as they are struggling with the same thing that you were struggling with years ago. And that now, years further into the future, you are seeing the fruit of that labor. And that is just it's such an exciting for me, energetic, motivating story that I think a lot of people out there would hopefully resonate with as they try to push towards fluency. That was so cool.
I really appreciate that. And I thank you for the opportunity, to come back, feel the airwaves, again with you guys. It was very fun.
Absolutely. Thank you for reaching out.
All right. So, guys, thank you so much for joining us here. If you are interested in contacting Jesus or working with him, you can check that down in the link below. We will send all the things so that if you are interested, learning a little bit more about his journey or what it takes to kind of create a whole new you can check that out below.